I was still in my winter coat, keys in hand, when my sister cornered me in the hallway of my parents' house with that particular look on her face. The one that means she's about to say something she thinks is kindness but isn't. "Just don't bring up the hospital thing tonight," she whispered, her voice low and careful like she was diffusing something. "Mom's been nervous all week about making a good impression with Tristan's family, and you know how it gets when people start asking questions about what you do." I stood there, one boot half off, staring at her. The hospital thing. That's what she was calling it. 3 months. I had been gone for 3 months, barely answering texts, missing my niece's birthday party over FaceTime, sending my mother 5-word replies at midnight. And apparently the story they had quietly agreed on to explain my absence was that I had some trouble at the hospital, that I had been let go, maybe, or burned out, or both. They had decided I was the cautionary tale. I just hadn't been given my lines yet. I pulled off my other boot, set them both neatly by the door, and said, "Sure." The house smelled like my mom's baked salmon and the specific kind of tension that only exists when someone's trying very hard to make everything seem fine. There were real cloth napkins. My mother had ironed cloth napkins for a Sunday dinner, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she was taking this. My sister's fiancé, Tristan, was already installed in the living room like he owned it, sitting in my late father's armchair, his legs crossed, and a glass of something amber in his hand. He was 31, maybe 32. He had the kind of jawline that photographs well, and the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no by anyone who mattered. His parents were there too. His mother perched on the edge of the sofa in a wrap dress that probably cost more than my first used. Honda, his father, standing near the fireplace, with the posture of a man who was always slightly bored by whatever room he was in. I introduced myself and shook hands and said the right things and found a seat at the far end of the sectional, next to my teenage nephew, who was the only person in the room who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. The conversation drifted the way it always does at these things. Real estate prices in the GTA, the best ski hills in Quebec, whether the Leafs had any chance this season. I ate a handful of crackers and cheese and watched. Tristan was the kind of person who made everything a performance. Even his silences were pointed. He waited for a pause and then leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said to no one in particular, "So, I've been going through a pretty major career transition myself." His mother smiled the way mothers smile when their child says something that reflects well on them. "Oh," my own mother said, because she was polite and also genuinely curious, because she is always genuinely curious about anyone my sister loves. "Yeah, I've been headhunted," which honestly I knew was coming. You get to a certain level in your field and the right doors just start opening. He glanced around the room. "I'm in the final stages of an assessment process with Meridian Health Partners." The cracker I was eating turned to chalk in my mouth. Meridian Health Partners, my organization. The one I had spent the last 14 weeks building from the ground up after the provincial government contracted us to overhaul healthcare data management across 4 regions of Ontario. The one where I had just 3 weeks ago been formally appointed as executive director, a role that hadn't been publicly announced yet because we were still finalizing the transition from the interim structure. I swallowed the cracker. I picked up my water glass. I didn't say anything. "What kind of assessment process?" my sister asked, and the warmth in her voice when she looked at him, the uncomplicated pride of someone who loves a person and is still in the early stages of believing everything they say, that was the part that hurt. "Senior strategic lead," Tristan said. "It's a new role, very competitive. I'm told they've interviewed over 60 people across 3 provinces, and they're down to the final 5. He paused for effect. "I'm expecting the offer next week." I set down my water glass very carefully. "That's incredible," my mom said. "What does the role involve?" "Healthcare system redesign. It's technical. Data governance, policy architecture, regional integration." He waved a hand, not dismissing it so much as signaling that he was choosing to simplify. Not the kind of work most people can just walk into. It's really a culmination of everything I've been building toward. His father made a low sound of approval. His mother touched his arm briefly. I looked at my sister. She was glowing. Genuinely, completely, beautifully glowing. And I thought, she doesn't know. She has sitting next to a man who has constructed a very particular version of himself. And she has believed it. And she loves what she believes. And she has no idea she's been handed a script. What about you? Tristan's mother asked, and it took me a second to realize she was speaking to me. Your sister tells us you're in healthcare as well? I am, I said. Administrative? She asked, pleasantly, without malice, which somehow made it worse. Something like that, I said. Tristan looked at me for the first time all evening. There was something in his expression. A quick appraisal top to bottom, and then he nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he'd already suspected. Tough sector to navigate right now, especially with all the restructuring happening at the provincial level. A lot of good people have been caught in the crossfire. I said. Is that what happened with your situation? He asked. And his tone was so careful, so deliberately sympathetic, that I could tell he'd been briefed. My sister had told him. He knew the stories they'd cited Sean and he was using it, and he was doing it in front of his parents, and I understood in that moment with complete clarity that he was not a kind person. He was a person who was very good at performing kindness while doing something else entirely. My situation is fine, I said. He held my gaze for a half-second too long, then smiled. Good. It's hard when things don't work out the way we plan. No shame in regrouping. He turned back to the room. Honestly, that's what I admire about the people doing the real work in healthcare. The frontline administrators, the coordinators. Unglamorous, but somebody's got to do it. My mother laughed a small, uncertain laugh. My sister looked at her plate. I excused myself to get more water and stood in my parents' kitchen for 90 seconds, looking at the magnetic calendar on the fridge. My nephew had a hockey tournament the following Saturday. My sister's birthday was in 3 weeks. Normal things. A normal life happening in this house that smelled like salmon and ironed napkins. I breathed out. I went back to the table. The rest of the dinner was a study in things unsaid. Tristan's father talked at length about the failures of the public healthcare system, a subject on which he had many opinions and no particular expertise. Tristan agreed with everything his father said and elaborated on it in ways that demonstrated a competent familiarity with surface-level healthcare policy terminology, but nothing deeper. He used the word ecosystem 4 times. He said data-driven decision-making, without ever specifying what decisions, what data, or who was making them. I ate my salmon. I listened. I said almost nothing. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room, I helped my mother clear the table. She handed me a stack of plates and kept her eyes on the sink and said quietly, "He seems very accomplished." "He's in a process," I said carefully. "He hasn't gotten anything yet." "Still," she said. And then, lower, "Are you okay, sweetheart? You seem tired." I looked at her profile. The gray coming in at her temples, the particular slope of her shoulders when she's worried about something she doesn't know how to ask about directly. She had spent 3 months quietly assuming the worst about my silence, and she had been too kind, or too scared, to call and ask. Just like she had been too kind or too scared to push back on whatever story had calcified in her household while I was gone. "I'm okay, Mom," I said. "I promise. I just have a very important week ahead." She patted my arm. She didn't push. I drove home on the 401 with the radio off, watching the city lights slide past in the dark. By the time I got to my apartment in the West End, something had sharpened inside me. Not anger exactly. Anger was too hot for what I was feeling. This was more like clarity. Like the moment before you make a call you've been putting off, when you finally realize there's nothing left to wait for. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the Meridian files. Tristan's full name was in the candidate pool. I want to be precise about what I did next, because it's easy to make this sound more dramatic than it was. I didn't plot. I didn't strategize. I did my job. As executive director, Final approval on senior strategic hires was mine. The selection committee had done excellent work. They were rigorous, they were fair, and they had narrowed the pool to 5 genuinely strong candidates. Tristan had made it to that final 5. On paper, he looked credible. MBA from a well-regarded Ontario school, consulting background, a few legitimate healthcare-adjacent projects in his history. But I had heard him talk about my organization at my parents' dinner table, and something snagged. He had described the role with a specific level of technical fluency, but when pressed by my mother's polite, basic questions, he had pivoted to generalities. He had used the right vocabulary without demonstrating the underlying comprehension. I spent an hour reviewing his application package more carefully than I had the first time when I'd simply been triaging a large file. I looked at his written submission for the policy scenario exercise we'd sent to all finalists. It was polished, confident, but it treated regional integration as a straightforward alignment problem, which is exactly the kind of error someone makes when they've read about healthcare governance without ever working inside it. Real regional integration in Ontario involves inter-ministry negotiation, First Nations, data sovereignty considerations, legacy citoyens that don't appear in any published framework. You can't fake your way through that in an interview with someone who has spent the past year actually building the infrastructure. He was scheduled for his final interview that Thursday at 10 a.m. I sent a note to my assistant, confirming I'd be leading the session myself. The Meridian offices were on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Toronto, glass and light, with a view of the lake on clear days. I was there by 9:30, coffee in hand, reviewing the scenario questions I planned to walk him through. At 9:58, my assistant's voice came through the phone. "Mr. Colton is here." "Thank you," I said. "Give me 2 minutes, then send him in." I heard the door open. I heard the particular rhythm of someone entering a room with intention, that slight performance of ease that confident people do when they want to make sure a room knows they've arrived. And then I heard him stop. I looked up from the documents in my hands. He was standing just inside the doorway in a well-cut charcoal suit, one hand loosely at his side, the other still on the door handle behind him. His expression had done something complicated, started as a professional smile and then encountered something that didn't fit and was now trying to reorganize itself into a shape that made sense. "Hi, Tristan," I said. "Come sit down." He came and sat down. He did it slowly, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "I didn't know you worked here," he said. "I don't work here," I said. "I run it. I'm the executive director. This is my final interview for the senior strategic lead position." I set the documents on the table between us. "Let's get started." I gave him credit for composure. He gathered himself faster than I would have expected. He was practiced at recovery. We started with the policy scenario. I asked him to walk me through his written submission, probe some of the assumptions, see where the thinking was genuinely his, and where it had been borrowed from something he'd read. He was articulate, smooth. He used the ecosystem word again. Then I asked him about regional integration. How would you approach building trust with Indigenous health authorities in Northern Ontario when the provincial data framework doesn't align with their community consent processes? He paused. "That's a really important tension to navigate," he said. "Walk me through how you'd navigate it," I said. He talked for about 90 seconds. He said the right things about consultation and center approach building and community-centered approaches. And then he ran out of specifics, because he didn't have any. Because this was not something you could absorb from a framework for a document. You had to have been in the room. You had to have sat across from community health directors and understood what they were actually asking for and where the genuine friction points lived. "Can you give me an example?" I said. "From your previous work, of a time you managed a conflict between a mandated reporting structure and a community's data sovereignty preferences?" The silence was brief but complete. "My work has primarily been in the private sector," he said. "So the specific framework is a bit different." "I understand," I said. "That's fine. But the question is about the skill, not the sector. Can you give me an example? He gave me one. It was vague. It was the kind of answer that means you don't have one. I moved on to the technical section. I walked him through a real scenario, anonymized, but pulled from an actual challenge we were dealing with in our eastern region. I asked him how he'd approach resolving a data reconciliation problem between two legacy systems that used different patient identifier formats. He knew what a patient identifier was. He knew legacy systems were a problem. He did not know what to do about the specific conflict I'd described, and his answer revealed that he understood data governance at approximately of someone who had taken a weekend certification course, which, when I checked his credentials afterward, was indeed the extent of his training. The Advanced Healthcare Informatics designation listed on his CV referred to a 12-hour online module, not the 2-year professional program the credential's name implied. I finished my questions. I thanked him for his time. "Can I ask?" he said, and his voice had lost the smoothness. Was Sunday relevant to this?" I looked at him. "Sunday was my family dinner," I said. "This is a job interview. The only thing Sunday is relevant to is the fact that I happened to hear you describe this role, and what you said raised some questions I wanted to ask in person." I paused. "The answers you gave me today are the reasons you won't be moving forward." He didn't say anything. "You're a strong candidate on paper," I said. "Because it was true and because I am not cruel. Your consulting experience is real. Your policy background has genuine value. But the scope of this role requires depth in areas where you're still building. That's not a character flaw. It's just not the right fit. Does my sister know?" he asked. And the fact that that was his next question, not about the role, not about feedback, but about my sister, told me something. "This is a confidential process," I said. "What you choose to tell her is your decision." He left. The door closed. My deputy, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table taking notes throughout, let out a slow breath. "That was," she said, and then stopped. "Yeah," I said. "He told my sister he hadn't gotten the offer because the organization had restructured the role internally. He told her this on Thursday evening. He told her he was disappointed but not surprised, because the culture there had seemed off to him anyway, and he'd been half hoping to focus on a different opportunity he had in the pipeline. He did not tell her. I was the one who'd interviewed him. I know all of this because my sister called me Friday morning, not to talk about Tristan, but because she'd been thinking about our Sunday dinner and she wanted to apologize. "I shouldn't have told you not to bring up work," she said. "I think I was nervous and I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair." I was standing at my kitchen counter with my second coffee, looking out the window at the March slush on the street below. "It's okay," I said. "It's not," she said. I think Mom and I both got in our heads about what was going on with you, and we made assumptions, and she exhaled. "What is actually going on with you? Like, actually. Can you just tell me?" So I told her. Not dramatically, not all at once. I just told her the truth, that the past 3 months had been the most demanding period of my professional life, that I'd been appointed to lead a provincial healthcare initiative that I couldn't discuss publicly yet, that I wasn't unemployed or struggling or burned out. I was, if anything, the opposite. The silence on her end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "You're the executive director?" she said finally. "Yeah," I said. "Of Meridian, yeah." Another quietly. "Tristan interviewed there this week." "I know," I said. I didn't tell her I'd been the one across the table from him. I didn't need to. I could hear her putting it together, the way you can hear someone thinking over the phone, the small sounds of comprehension arriving in the wrong order. "He told me they restructured the role," she said. "Okay," I said. "Did they?" I chose my words carefully. "I can't speak to specific hiring outcomes," I said. "What I can tell you is that I lead that organization, and everything that happens there goes through me." The silence this time was different. "I need to think," she said. "I know," I said. "Take all the time you need," she called back 2 days later. She'd asked him directly. Not about me specifically, but about the details of his candidacy, the ones that hadn't quite added up, the things she'd noticed but filed away because it was easier to believe the version of him she'd been given. He had admitted some of it. Not all of it. Enough that she had called her best friend and cried for 2 hours, and then called me. She came over that Sunday. She brought coffee from the good place near her apartment, the one we both grew up walking to with our dad, and we sat at my kitchen table and she was quiet for a long time. "I feel so stupid," she said. "You're not stupid," I said. "I saw things," she said. "I saw things that didn't add up and I chose not to look at them." "That's not stupidity," I said. "That's love. Love makes you want the version that works." She looked at the table. "He told me you were struggling." After Sunday, he said you'd been laid off and you were clearly embarrassed about it and I should be gentle with you. She looked up. And I believed him. Because I already thought that. That was the part that sat with me longest, not that Tristan had lied, but that the lie had found such easy purchase. They had all been so ready to believe in my failure that it had taken no effort at all to maintain. "I wasn't embarrassed," I said. "I was just busy. And I probably should have communicated better. That's on me too." "No," she said. "You shouldn't have to explain yourself to your own family." I let that sit. She ended things with him the following week. She didn't make a big announcement about it. She returned his things in a bag and changed her relationship status and didn't post anything or perform it for anyone. She just quietly dismantled the life she'd been building with him and started the slower, harder work of deciding what she actually wanted. My mother called me the Tuesday after it happened. She didn't say much. She told me she was proud of me, not for what had happened with Tristan, but in general, for all the things I'd been doing that she hadn't known about. She said she was sorry she'd assumed. She said it simply, without making it into a moment, which is the most meaningful way my mother knows how to apologize. "I should have called," she said. "When you went quiet, I should have just called." "I should have answered," I said. Meridian's appointment was officially announced in April. Regional integration rollout across the 4 target regions. My name, my title, the scope of the initiative. My sister texted me a screenshot of the press release with a single line. "That's my sister." I'm not going to pretend the family dynamics shifted overnight. They didn't. There's still an awkwardness at gatherings, a recalibration happening in real time. The quiet adjustment that occurs when the story everyone agreed on turns out to be wrong. My mother still has a reflex toward worry when I'm quiet. My sister is still finding her footing after something she thought was real turned out to be a construction. But she's finding it. We talk more now. Real conversations, not curated ones. She told me recently that she'd started therapy, that she was trying to understand what she'd been looking for in someone like Tristan, the performance of success, the certainty, the way he made her feel like she was to something important. "I think I didn't trust myself enough," she said. "So I found someone who was very confident and I borrowed it." "That makes sense," I said. "I understand that." "Do you ever feel that way?" she asked. "Like you're borrowing confidence?" I thought about it, about the Sunday dinners and the assumptions and the cloth napkins and the 14-hour days in the months before the announcement, when I had no proof yet that it was all going to work, when the whole thing still felt precarious and enormous and somehow mine to carry. "Sometimes," I said. "But then you just keep going anyway, and eventually, you forget which parts are borrowed and which parts are just you." She smiled. It was the smile I recognized from when we were kids, the one before she knew how to perform anything. That was enough.